Well, hello friends, David Bose here. It's a beautiful day in Oklahoma. It's raining. It's not cold out. Just got through visiting with my daughter. Had a really nice Thanksgiving with her. And now I'd like to go ahead and, I just haven't had time for the last few days. I apologize because some of you have been probably waiting for the number 2 in the series on, noisy, on this birth certificate and, government and canon law and all of the stuff that we were discussing in the last thing. We promised in the last video that we'd get into canon law, different kinds of law, and what kind of a law are we under. Because a lot of people are saying we're under Admiralty law. Some say it's maritime law, which is kind of two subsets of the same thing. But nobody ever really explains in any detail how we could be under Admiralty law. Aren't we under the Constitution? Aren't we under some kind of, don't we have legislators here in America? Aren't they on the land? Aren't they making laws for us? Isn't somewhere in the Constitution that doesn't give our government the right to legislate laws and stuff like that? No, the federal government has no right no right to make laws, because all the federal government drafted a constitution in back when they started. And that was simply to say that you're free. You've been enslaved and in bondage for a long time. And a bunch of pilgrims come over here. And what did pilgrims come over here for? Because they were being martyred in the Inquisitions. And they didn't have rights. They weren't even free to believe what they wanted to believe, let alone do what they wanted to do. And they didn't want to be taxed. So, we come over in boats to get away from government. And there's just big open spaces and room to, you get your mule and your 20 acres and you're able to go out there and pretty much do whatever you want. This is the Wild West, right? We did what we wanted to do, but we would go out and create a community, and the local community would make their own laws. In this town, this is what you can't drink in this town. If everybody wanted to live in that town, didn't want to drink, okay, fine. But there were towns where that's all they did was drink, right? And that was the law. So there's so many different things we don't understand, but the federal government was not allowed to make laws. Each of the states were not just part of the United States of America, as if the government was the United States of America. No. That's not the government. America was a union of various governments, like the European Union. Europe is not a country, it's not a nation, but they created a union of governments. Among them was Spain and France and Britain and Greece and la-di-da-di-da. All these different countries and nations formed a union called the European Union. And everybody seems to understand that European Union doesn't make laws for Spain. The European Union doesn't make law, not supposed to, because maybe they're having some of the same problems that we're having, over here now. But because there's always this little creep effect, right? They start with one thing and then, oh, buddy, now we can do something else. Because originally the European Union, so they can trade for their partners and have a better trade deals and stuff. So beware of these trade deals, these unions. Now we've got, we're making deals with China. See, this is very important that you understand all of this, because remember, a president does not rule or preside over a government or a nation. Kings and emperors do. And if the emperor or the king doesn't rule over a particular nation, then it may be a colony of another nation, and in that case, the minister of the queen could be a prime minister of a particular country. Like Canada, they have a prime minister. Canada is not a separate government. They're a colony of of Britain. And so they have a prime minister, and they answer to her. Well, there's a few different major countries in the world, just a very few, that have presidents. A president is not a prime minister. He doesn't, and we don't have kings. So we're not a nation. We're a community, a union of other nations. But we're not a nation. The United States is not a nation. So, we're not supposed to be. We're not supposed to be able to make laws. We're just supposed to there were certain things that this union would give, and that is the right to together to trade with each other, and to have certain laws whereby we could trade with one another, and we could have a military to protect our union. But there was no right for that government to tax us, or to say, oh, we own this land now, so if you want to live on the land, you got to buy it from the government, or somehow it's BLM land, right? The Bureau of Land Management, right? Or the Forest Service of the federal government. The federal government doesn't get to do that. So there's something's gone wrong here. So we have state law and local law. This is why we have counties and county seats and courthouses. But it's deep. I mean, this is just the surface, okay? It goes even deeper than that. We shouldn't have any laws over here. But remember, let me start with some of the most terrible misconceptions, or lies, shall we say, that we've been taught. We were taught that we had a revolution and we won. And therefore we're our own country, and therefore we all own the land now. A government for the people and by the people. Here's what actually happened. Britain sent out people in boats, different countries, Spain, France. These particular governments and countries colonized the world. And they colonized the world under the government of Christ, or Christianity. It was all under the auspices of the Pope. See, that's why you've got various kingdoms. Germany went and colonized part of Africa. The Dutch, excuse me. France, you've got French Quebec. You've got the British Columbia in Canada. So there's different countries that colonize different places. Why were they all doing it? Because they were all doing it as part of one thing. Part of the Roman Universal Catholic law, canon law, that was built on precedent from ancient law, which is the Mosaic law. And therefore what was precedent stood. So they went ahead and said that, yeah, we're still going to go by adultery and lying and perjury and bearing false witness, and slavery was a part of it. So therefore part of this law is slavery. You cannot get around that, and you cannot have law as it is today, or as it has been for thousands of years. It cannot exist without slavery. And therefore you are a slave. Even today, you are. It literally says we are slaves in all of these laws that they drafted and ratified the 14th Amendment. We're going to get to that. The 14th Amendment is, you probably heard Kanye West saying we need to get rid of the 14th Amendment. And people are like, what? Is that boy crazy? Is he deaf? Is he stupid? That guy's nuts, man. He don't know what he's talking about, Why, shoot. If we didn't have the 14th Amendment, we wouldn't have freed the slaves, right? I mean, that's what that's all about. Doesn't he want to be free? Well, friends, the 14th Amendment did not free the slaves. All it did was emancipate them, which transferred, they compensated those lords and all the manors and the slave owners. They compensated them with money, just like we talked about. Marriage is a contract written on bond paper, just like your birth certificate. We're going to get to that. That bond paper is an agreement, official, government official agreement. It's a contract. It's a certification. It's a registration. You get a woman and she signs it until death do she part, or she can be murdered. Now, we don't necessarily carry out the death penalty anymore, but it's still a contract of ownership. And if a woman were to leave her husband, her owner, that's what that means. Husband means owner, look it up. Exodus 21 verse 7, if you sell your daughter as a slave, she shall not go free, as do the other slaves. Ever. But you put a ring on her, and she's a permanent slave. And that's what marriage was. So when you find some defect in her that you don't like, and you don't want her anymore, you can, what? Let her go? No. She has to have a bill of divorce. A certificate, a bill that says, and what is divorce? It's not what we think today. It doesn't mean, oh, you're free. You don't get to go free. The slaves didn't go free. They were bought and paid for. And so they got to be compensated for it. And that means you're purchased again. And who was purchasing you? Well, the next guy. He repurchased you. The redemption, the repurchase price, our Lord Jesus repurchased us. And that means he paid for us. Now, what did he do with this? Well, he said, you're not my slaves, and I'm not your master. Because, you see, I have bought you so that I could set you free. Because you were in bondage, you were paid for, you were, all that guy wanted was his money. Now that I bought you, I could do whatever I wanted with you. But I purchased you so that I could set you free. See, a servant doesn't know what his master is doing. But I've told you all things that I do. You know everything I'm doing. You're not my servants, but you're my friends, Jesus said. So, when the slaves in the 14th Amendment were emancipated, there's a little clause there that it says, if you can be redeemed from your slave owner and set free from them, but not set free from them if you agree to be our slave. That's what it says. I know you're probably thinking, what the hell is this man saying? Well, look, come on over here with this guy's saying over here. This guy's crazier than a bed bug, man. I tell you what, he's just saying some super stuff. You should come on over here and record this, because I don't know what the heck. Well, I'm telling you the truth. The 14th Amendment says you are subject to all of the laws and penalties and constitutions and agreements of the United States, which is a corporation. In 1871, it was made a corporation. It is not a country. It is not a nation. It is a corporation. And all of the states became franchises and set up a corporate body so that they could do business. It's all about business and buying and selling and purchasing women and slaves. So you see, when the slaves were set free, they were at the same time made slaves to the government. Now remember, To become a citizen doesn't make you free. It makes you a bond servant to your owner who you signed a bond. That's what your birth certificate is. You're registered with the government. So you're not free. Now, originally when people came to this country, they didn't have birth certificates. People never had any birth certificates. They weren't registered to a government. What do you have to sign a piece of paper for when you're born? If we're all free-born and we have inalienable rights from God, then what do we need to register with some corporation for? We don't. We're not supposed to. But you do, and that's the problem. So originally, the people in this country were free-born citizens. The slaves were not free-born. They were brought over here, and they were slaves. They were free, and then made citizens of this government and slaves of the government. From that point forward, it's the very same time, right after the Civil War, that President Lincoln declared martial law, and I'm going to show you, and I'm going to prove. Probably won't hear this from any other people are saying it, but there's no proof out there. I'm going to give proof in this video for all the stuff that I'm telling you. Because a lot of people say, well, we're not under martial law today because that's military law. And there's military is not in the street. Well, here's the problem. We didn't have such a thing as police because that's just another word for military. We've always had military, for thousands of years, but right after the Civil War, he started a thing called policing. And originally that was called slave policing or slave patrolling. And what they did, once they let the slaves go, they had to control them somehow. This went along for years with Jim Crow laws and everything else. So the police were there to protect the billionaires and all of their wealth. They weren't there to lower the crime rate or protect the citizens, all right? Because the citizens were slaves of the state. So they are the property. That bond makes you the property. You sign away your life. You're registering with the government. And from that point forward, you have a right, what? To the Constitution? That's over now. Because that was America back in 1776. Now you're under the corporation of the United States of America. And under this corporation, you have certain rights, which are you get stipends, you get a little food. Slaves have to have food. You can't work a man without feeding him, right? And they want workers. You're a slave. Buddy, you better get out and work. Jobs, 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 and that's all that really matters. As long as there's more jobs. And buddy, if there's lots of jobs, man, then the president of this corporation is doing a good job because he's representing his shareholders. And so therefore, you are not a free man. You were not a freeborn citizen. All of the individuals who were freeborn citizens of this, they weren't citizens, they were freeborn Americans. All those people have died years and years ago. There are no more freeborn people. Now, since the Civil War, from right about in around 1853 to 1875, England started making it compulsory to have a registration of birth. To register with the Corporation of London. Remember, there's the government of the Vatican, which is a city, a small city that rules over the world. And they have a subsidiary, which is London, which is another subsidiary of Rome. And the Queen is under his authority, and the DC, the District of Columbia, there's 100. They designated 100 square miles. Now they've sold off some of it or gotten rid of some of it somewhere, and now it's like 68 miles or something. But this little area called District of Columbia doesn't belong to any state. It's not part of Virginia or North Carolina or any of these other states. But it's a separate entity, and it's a corporation, DC. And that corporation is what is making an agreement. See, in order to buy and sell, you have to have a signature. you have to have a person to do business with. So they don't do business with people. They do business with other corporations or businesses. So you have to be incorporated to do business. So if you're going to get Social Security, and you're going to get welfare payments, and you're going to get your stipend and your food, and you're going to be, given some drugs to keep you down. The cattle got to have their vaccines, and so we're going to sell and buy and sell them in the stock exchange, because we're just cattle. Because you see, a stock exchange is where that's where they sold cattle. And the elite, they had a big stock. You ever heard of Stockholm? Well, London had a stock house too, and they brought the cattle and the sheep and all the things in the slaves, and they sold them. Sold them to the highest bidder. That's called a stock market. And you were bought with bonds. So the stocks and bonds that you purchase originally was for property. Well, that all changed at various different times throughout our history. One of the major dates for this change was 1871, when the United States became a corporation. Of course, it started, like I said, with England and with the Vatican years before that, but we ran away from the Vatican, got rid of the Inquisition, and tried to become free. Well, then they followed us over here. Now, we were told that when we got here, we had a revolution and we won the war, and so now we're free. No more taxes without representation, right? All of that's a big lie. You see, because Freemasonry, as most of you know, George Washington and all of these people, I beat the horn a little bit on accident. But the founders, the founders of our country were all Freemasons. Now, a lot of you say, oh boy, brother, oh, that's a bad thing. No, that's not a bad thing. The Freemasons were anathema to the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church is the enemy, Rome is the enemy, and their subsidiary London. And we were trying to get away from them, the Protestants and the Catholics. We were trying to get away from them. Because they were enslaving us and taxing us and forcing us to do things to be their slaves, and we wanted to become free. So we came over here to America, and remember these Freemasons, they were building the churches, the libraries, the civilization of love and wisdom and knowledge. They were building the great temples down there in Egypt. They were the mystery schools, teaching us the wisdom of the ancient ones, how to be spiritual beings. Not about this carnal world. It's not about buying and selling. The esoteric wisdom. But certain ones of the gods wanted to keep us as slaves. We're not going to go back through all of that. We discussed this over and over and over again, especially in the first video. And those particular gods infiltrated these institutions, libraries, and schools. The Bible talks about the school of the prophets that Elijah started. And they got inspiration from a divine source and taught these divine truths. And we have the scriptures today. And Jesus came in a long tradition of these teachers. He was a master, and he had students. Today we call them disciples or students. Are you a disciple of Christ? Well, then you're a student of a mystery school. And it calls it the sect of the Nazarenes in the Bible. And the Apostle Paul, after the death of Christ, became the ringleader of the Nazarenes. And another group was called the Ebionites, and they were ruled or led by James, the brother of the Lord. Down in Egypt, they called them the Therapeutai. They were the healers. And Ebionite means the poor. In your Bible, it probably says the poor. In Jerusalem, they were going to give these they were collecting all that they had, everything they could come up with, and they were going to go to Jerusalem and give to the poor in Jerusalem. In other words, the Ebionites, which is a sect. You can read that in history with Josephus and Pliny, and all these different historians talk about, including the Dead Sea Scrolls that we dug up in the Nag Hammadi Library. We know absolutely conclusively the history of what happened. So these schools that were teaching these mysteries, they were Christians. They were first called Christians in Antioch. And the Bible says these Christians were originally called Nazarenes, and before that, Essenes. Under John the Baptist, they were Essenes, according to the historians. Jesus the Nazarene, John the Baptist handed it over to another teacher, to his teacher. And he says, he's going to keep on increasing, I'm going to go on decreasing. John the Baptist was beheaded. And John says, now go follow Jesus, because he's going to take over. He's going to be your leader now. So Jesus brought some more truths and some more enlightenment. And these schools then were teaching people and initiating them, as Paul was initiated into the Essenes on the road to Damascus. He was going to this place in Damascus. The Dead Sea Scrolls we've dug up talks about the Damascus document, which was a document, the rule of the community of the Essenes in Damascus. That's where Paul was going, and it says he spent 3 years there. And at the end of those 3 years, he was initiated in the mysteries and heard those words which were unlawful for a man to speak. Because at that point, they were murdering them. Jesus was murdered, martyred, and all the apostles. And after they died, all the Christians were martyred, all the way down into the Dark Ages. The enemy was beheading those esoteric believers that were originally called Gnostics. See, most people don't understand that Christianity is not just all about faith. They like faith. They were people with believing in faith, but they also believed in knowledge. See, because faith is something that you use to acquire knowledge. And this is why the scripture says this means eternal life, taking in gnosis. Like the Gnostics, this is what they did. The gnosis of God. And this is really just another way of saying the same thing that the serpent said in the garden: if you eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you shall become like God. And then Jesus came and offered us the tree of life as well, and said, you're gods and the scripture cannot be broken. So these schools were teaching all of these ancient mysteries, and they were Gnostics, and they were murdered, and they were killed. And Sir Isaac Newton was teaching amazing truths and invented calculus and all this stuff. And he was an esoteric believer. He translated the Emerald Tablets, which is an esoteric document coming out of Spain, which is where many of these esoteric believers were holding up as refuge there, because Spain at that time wasn't under the control of the Catholic Church. But Spain was controlled by the Moors, or the African peoples. And in those days, there was a great library down in Timbuktu. And this is where we get the saying, if you want to know something, you got to go to Timbuktu to get it. Because the Dark Ages was reigning in Europe, and you couldn't find it there. You couldn't find the truth. They were up there, arguing and battling and murdering one another and hating one another and killing one another and declaring anathema and on everyone and cursing everyone and making edicts, and it was a terrible thing. So the people down in Africa and over in the East were free, and they had libraries, and there was a great library in Timbuktu down in Ghana, excuse me. So, this is what started the Age of Enlightenment, was these people like Sir Isaac Newton and Galileo and individuals who, with this ancient wisdom, was teaching this amazing stuff. Well, they were trying to build these libraries and institutions. They went to London and they built London. And there was libraries and stuff like that. These were good people. Some of the best laws that were coming along, progression, freedom, liberty, started there. Protestants were up there in Europe. The problem is the Catholics never gave up their control. And the law Every time somebody did something wrong, it's in your mind. You believe, oh, it's wrong. We got to have laws. And so they took over the hearts and minds of the people. You were brainwashed. So you couldn't just have a revolution physical. You know, armies couldn't go in and just set people free. You had to set people free in their hearts and minds. And people, even today, still believe you've got to have laws, David, and you've got to punish people that commit adultery. You can't let those women go free. All right? Now, what would the children do if they just walked away from the children, you know? Well, that sounds like a very compelling argument, except for people shouldn't be slaves. And love should be a willing agreement, not a contract where you purchase a woman and force her to stay with you, and if not, you're going to murder her. This is not the way Christ taught. Christ did not teach the law. They said, hey, you and your disciples don't keep the Sabbath. And Jesus says, no, we don't. My Father is the same, is a different God than your God. Your father's the devil. He's a liar, an accuser, and a slanderer. My Father's love, and he's above, and yours is beneath. And my Father keeps on working until now, and I keep working. And so we pick grain on the Sabbath, and if we're hungry, we eat, because we're the lords of the Sabbath. We're the lords of the world. See, the Sabbath says you shall be a servant, a slave, 6 days. And then one day you get to rest. Because you see, if you have cattle and you work them all the time, they give out and they die. So you got to give them rest. So even the devil knows that he's got to let people rest. That's not some kind of moral law. It's our right. We can do whatever we want. We weren't created by our Father in heaven to till the soil. That was the God Yahweh, who cursed the ground and who cursed the woman and said, you shall be excuse me, dominated by the man. You shall be a slave to the man. So, anyway, I want to make it very clear that the individuals called the Freemasons were individuals, they were Masons. They were building churches, they were building libraries and institutions of freedom. And if you want proof of that, when these individuals came to America, they created a constitution which says you're free and you have inalienable rights from God. There's no hoax. This is real. It's free. The law says you're free, and they have no right to take away your freedom. You have freedom of speech. You have freedom to bear arms. You have freedom of everything. Freedom of press. To pursue your liberty and your happiness. And nobody can take it away from you. And all men are created equal. So, what happened? Well, we came over to be free. And we started, tilling the soil and being happy and having a little community and a little Thanksgiving dinner with the Indians and stuff. But then some more boats came over. More and more boats started coming over. And they started spreading out, and each of these towns started continuing along with laws and legislation the way they had been doing. So the founding fathers got together and said, well, now we can't allow you guys to start a government over here like you did over there and start demanding that they do what you want them to do. So we're going to say everybody's free. So what they did to get around that, well, first of all, this revolution that we've been told that occurred, we didn't win. Isn't it strange that a little country, a little handful of people would win the British armies? We never won. It's a fallacy. The fact is they had one little skirmish, and the British decided that the best way to control America was to let them think that we won. And then they would come in on their ships and set up the Constitution and the laws of commerce, trade with them. And they would then get a percentage of the money. They figured it out with the banking system, how they would get their money. It's being a big fraud. Now, these kings and queens of Britain, they had knights that worked for the throne, for Her Majesty. And on the way to becoming a knight, you had to become a lawyer. That's how you became a knight. It's called an esquire. In those days, they called it an esquire. These were individuals that worked for the throne. They got on boats, and they went with the colonists, and wherever they would go in these colonies, they were like lawyers doing business for the crown. And they, through trickery and through legalese and through the law that they would control, they would put bondage over everyone. Now, John Adams was an esquire for the British throne. And Benjamin Franklin, who had many visits to England, to London during the Revolution. He was a lawyer for England. So he was infiltrated, into the group called the Masons. He infiltrated the Masons, even though he was from the Illuminati. Remember, the Illuminati was started by Adam Weishaupt in 1776, just at the very same time that while Washington and this little group of Freemasons was trying to make a constitution of freedom and liberty, they knew they had to infiltrate it. They knew they had to stop it somehow. So at the very same day, they created the Illuminati, which means they had stated goals to infiltrate and to put laws and to tax people, and this was their goals. And they went in all over the world to set up their corporations with their lawyers, their esquires that worked for the crown, because it was all about money at this point. They had already created the banking system. So every bank in the world is working for the Bank of London, and that bank works for the Vatican Bank. And so all the money, all the taxes and everything, you have to understand, all the money since 1871, because especially since it happened in stages. But in the last 100 years, they've taken away the gold standard. And what they've done is they've decided that they can print $1, a piece of paper, that maybe is in circulation, that's constituted money, and they made a law that says they can loan $10 on that one. So then they take that $10 and they take 9 of it, they're allowed to take 9 of it and reinvest that. And then every dollar that they make in the investment, they can up it by 10. So it's infinitum. They can go on and on and on and make free money, and there is no gold standard, it's simply certain bureaucrats or certain individuals, esquires of the crown, lawyers that rule the world and through law keep us under subjection to the crown. So, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin were spies, you might say. They infiltrated our founding fathers, that group, and they had some negotiations. It wasn't like, oh, well, we won the war, Britain, hit the road, Toad. No, it wasn't like that at all. They didn't really win. They just, okay, let's not fight anymore, but let's negotiate. So they negotiated, and now we're under this contract that is that you don't own the land. You might be a free person. Originally, they were all free. There was no birth certificate yet. Nobody was registered with any corporation yet. So you were free, supposedly, born free, freeborn. You weren't a slave. But boats that were coming over from England, colonizing, were under maritime law. So this is where people get the idea we're under Admiralty law or maritime law. Because you see, the only law we're under is the Constitution. It says you can't make laws. So what they did was they instituted villages' local laws, and UCC, Uniform Contract Code, which is a universal law so that you can trade. It's all based on ancient law. You know, it just keeps growing and building. It started with 10 laws that Yahweh made on his mountain, It grew to 613. Add up 613, you get 10. See, no matter how many laws they make, it's always going to add up to 10. They could make 1,000,000 laws, but it's going to be a multiple of 10, meaning it's 10 is a representation of the carnal, physical, carnivorous beast law. That's why that beast in Revelation has 10 horns. So, this is why in the parables there's 10 servants that are stewards of the Lord, and they're the ones that are stewards of these commodities. They're holding land assets and gardening, and like a manor. They're a steward over a manor, and the owner goes his way on a journey, comes back and wants to know, how did you improve my estate? We're under estate law. We're under the law of the Lord of the manor, and the women were purchased by the manor. This is how it all started under the law of Moses. The law of slaves and purchasing and buying and war and those who wouldn't submit to the rule and give a portion to Yahweh, they were murdered, every man, woman, and child, even the babies and the donkeys and everything else. And so Genghis Khan did this under the same laws, and universally this is the way it's been. And so then in the days of Rome, they went on precedent and continued with these laws, and he became the vicar of Christ, the Pontifex Maximus, the great ruler, and they set up their throne over all the earth. The kings and queens of England they never did fully, Protestants never broke away completely from the Catholic rule. They still go by the same court system. You go to court, there's a guy with a black robe, that's a priest, and you're under the Inquisition, and you're gonna be judged by precedent, by old law, which Jesus said we're free. He repurchased us. But because we wouldn't receive the love of the truth that we might be saved, which is grace, we put ourselves back under this law. So we were under it again with the Constitution, and here comes these people on ships, and then esquires, lawyers for the crown, who snuck into this little group and negotiated this deal where, and they had to do it in increments. It didn't all happen all at once. By the time 1871, this is why they killed Lincoln, because he was trying to stop it. He was trying to stop them from creating a federal bank so that we could all be under bondage and paying all this money and being in bankrupt. And then right after that, right after the Civil War, we got compulsory registering of your infants with a register of birth. Why? Because you had to create a corporate entity to do business with the crown. They got to have their money. So, how are we still under martial law? Well, that's when the police started. Police is just a fancy word to say patrol or military that are protecting the bankers, because these individuals are going to be emancipated and made free. We're going to compensate the slave owners, and they're going to sign on the dotted line with their birth certificates, and now they're going to be involuntary slaves. No, voluntary slaves. See, that 14th Amendment and the 13th Amendment says there's never going to be any more involuntary slaves. Only voluntary. You have to, supposedly it's voluntary. You put your signature. Well, I didn't put my signature on the birth certificate. My mother did, and she didn't know. So it's illegal. But as long as there's laws that they've got that says that possession is 9/10 of the law. In other words, if you drive on that spot, cross somebody's property, and you do it for so many years, now you've got a right to drive there. Possession's 9/10 of the law. If you go and you move into somebody's house and they don't know you're there, and you spent 7 years there, or some states it's 5, or whatever it is, you've occupied that space, they can't take it away from you. Now it's yours. So the government has been occupying this country, and against the Constitution, we let them do it, and now they own it, and now they're telling you, this is BLM land, this is our land, you can't walk on that land. We've designated this whole area as a wilderness, and the little cockatook bird is in danger, we say, and so you can't hunt here, and you can't build here, and you can't go to the bathroom on the ground, because that's an endangering of the, of the land. It's all laws, it's bogus, it's wrong, and they don't own the land. But they have a corporation that they created called DC, and they did so with their lawyers, these esquires, like, these individuals like Benjamin Franklin that were running over there during the Revolutionary, getting their orders from the crown and infiltrating the original founding fathers, and they negotiated this situation which would allow for them to completely and slowly take us over. They had this plan. They did it in every other country. Every country that has a president is a corporation. There's only a few of them. And these are the major corporations that have power underneath the city of London and the city of the Vatican City. Those are the two main, in Washington, D.C., they run the world. And so those are corporations, and you, by signing your name on that registration of birth, and if you don't believe that what I'm telling you is true, then why is it that when President Lincoln declared martial law to try and stop these people, that they murdered him, and then continued on, started putting police on the street right after they supposedly freed the slaves? Now we all got to sign on the bottom line and subject to the laws and rules of this corporation called DC. Now we're all slaves. This is what happened. A lot of people say, well, that's not true, you can't prove it, and you can't. You see, it's just like the situation with, well, there's no soldiers ruling over us, so we're not under martial law. There are soldiers. They're called police. They're on every corner. They got to check your papers. This is why they got to have a new crisis, a new war. Every 2 years, they got to have a new war. The war on drugs, the war on crime, the war on, premature death from hanging, or whatever. They can make up any kind of crisis and say, well, there's a crisis now. There's a problem. We've got to crack down. There's an emergency. We've got to continue on with this martial law. We've got to have more police. Every time this crisis comes up, supposedly, they put more police, more military on the street. And they give them more powers to search and seize your property. And that's martial law. I don't care what you call it. That's called martial law. I don't care if you dress up the policeman in a khaki, with a machine gun and a helmet. A lot of police do wear helmets. And they do have riot gear and stuff in the streets. Look, at the very same time that we went to martial law, that's when they started police. At that very same time, that's when they started the birth certificates, registering you. And in 1871, this is a fact, you can look it up, they declared that DC was a corporation and all other states were just franchises or corporate entities that are capable of doing business with their DC counterparts under the lawyers or the esquires from the crown, who were knights of Her Majesty the Queen. And if that's not everything that you've been told, now, does that mean that registration that you sign is worth millions of dollars? Oh, yes, it is, because it's your life. You're a human being, and you're worth a lot. You're not just, one cow is worth, what, a couple $1,000s? A human being is a slave. Everything that you do, you think you're only worth $10 an hour or something like that? You're worth a lot more than that. That's all they give you just to eat. They only giving you a stipend, a wage, a little welfare. Oh, well, that's they gave me welfare, now that's not fair. You should go to work. No, nobody should be a slave. You shouldn't have to slave for your food. You're a free-born citizen. Or I should say you're a free-born human being. And you don't have to be a citizen. You don't need a birth certificate to prove that you're alive and that you deserve to have the pursuit of happiness. That Constitution was applied to everybody that was here, that came over from wherever they came. And it should apply everywhere in the world. Whenever somebody's born, they should have the right to live and to eat and to pursue happiness. But they don't have the right for me to have to work I shouldn't have to be forced to go out and slave and then give money to the government so they can pay for other people. No, that's communism. And that's not what we're under. What we should be under is the right that the land is from God. And a free person means you're born into the world, you have the rights to live in the world, to get you some land and build you a cabin and use the trees and the commodities and all the resources that are in this world that belong to God and therefore to all of us. No government should have the right to consolidate all the resources and then get 10% and divvy out a little for you to live. You can live there. You're renting it. You got to pay taxes to us. And if you don't pay your taxes, we're going to take it away from you. Who? The government? Who are they? They just get a stipend too. Who's the government? Well, the lawyers are working as beneficiaries, the lawyers are working for the beneficiary. They're the ones that are negotiating a deal with you. As you sign a piece of paper, you became a corporate entity yourself so that you can buy and sell with this other corporation. So you're registered, you're enrolled in this system where you can get your stipend of food so that you can go and work. If you don't work, you don't get to get your little stipend so you can eat. You don't work, you're not a slave, then you don't get no food. See, you can't go out there and work the ground yourself. See, there's all these resources. You can't have those resources. Those belong to the government. You got to work for us and we'll give you a stipend. So that's what this is about. And that's what martial law is, the police and all the laws. These are not part of the Constitution. They're foreign. And yes, much of the law we're under is from maritime law and Admiralty law from the Crown, because they came over in boats and set up their governments originally using their maritime law as colonists. Christopher Columbus is a code for the colonizers of the Christian church, which is the Catholic Church. There's nothing wrong with Christ, but they call themselves Christ. They appropriate that name to themselves. See, they make it they patent it. Well, now we have the legal right to use this name. Just like they commandeered the name America and United States, and they said, well, now this is in capital letters, the United States of America, capital letters, corporation. Now, okay, you made a rule that says you can appropriate the name America, but that's not the original America and the Constitution. And it's not legal, and we're not really under it. It's a farce. So, I don't know, but there is just so much we could cover, and I'm up to 53 minutes now, and there's just so much we could cover. I'm going to go ahead and stop here probably, and we'll probably do a third video, talk a little bit more about it, and it's complicated, and it's more or less the repercussions of all of this and what it means and what we can do about it. Is there a way we can take our birth certificate and rip it up and say, oh, I'm not going to be playing in this game anymore? Yeah, there is. But the problem with what people are saying on the internet about this is that somehow or another you can cash it in and make a bunch of money. See, that's completely the wrong attitude. That's the reason we're in bondage, because we want money, luxury. We want their stuff. You can't have their stuff unless you're going to be a slave to them. So if you're going to rip up your Constitution, rip up your registration of birth and throw away your driver's license, then you don't get to drive anymore. Well, then that's not fair. No, they built the roads. This system, this evil conglomerate beast system. We're no part of it. We got to get out of it. That's the only way to get free. And we're going to talk about it in the next video. Anyway, I'm David Lowe, so I'm going to go ahead and go, and I hope you guys have a great day. We'll see you again tomorrow. Have a good one.